So joining me now on stage is Jason and Will, who you've already met, and Russell Adkins. So Russell started his accounting career in 2006 and obtained his CPA license in 2010. Russell worked for and still does work for Kawahara and Company, and Russell is currently the Chief Financial Officer for the Maui Brewing Company. Let's have a hand for Russell and the entire panel. Where was I? Okay, so again, this is hard to do. Back there, if you go to http://siftly.sif.ly and enter the code HSBC, which you've already probably done, HSBC 19, then you can ask questions of the panel. So please, let's hear what you want to know. I know this is a very touchy subject because it makes me want to go home and change my passwords and crawl under a rock, but that's not what we're here for. We want to make sure this doesn't happen to other people. And so I'm looking forward to your questions, but I'm going to start it off with one of my own. And that is, if I find I've been attacked or I suspect I've been attacked, when am I supposed to call law enforcement?
That's a very good question.
But before you answer that, let me just say that your answer and the answer of a business may be two different things depending on the perspective of the user. So please, Will.
Yes, so it's very easy for me to answer that from my FBI perspective. If something happens to you, contact law enforcement. It's the same as in your home. If somebody burglarizes it, breaks into your home, you don't hesitate to call HPD because you want them to track down the bad guy who did this. Even though there might be a unlikely chance that HPD would be able to catch the guy or at least recover your goods, you're still gonna make that law enforcement call because that's your duty and responsibility. That's just what makes sense if something was gonna happen to you. When it comes to cyber though, that seems to get very, very fuzzy because then we're worried about PII and different types of disclosures. The main thing that I wanted to say though is contacting the FBI is not the same as contacting press or the news. No offense to our news friends, but we do not do that. We do not, we actually really do not like in the press. We have been in the press a lot more than we would like recently for other reasons, but we do not, that it will impede an investigation. So contacting law enforcement is not the same thing as making it public. So if you receive a phishing email or anything like that, ic3.gov. If you are in the middle of a ransomware, that's a phone call to FBI Honolulu. I'm in the middle of a cyber incident, please help me. We do like that. Even if we're not able to action it, it goes into our database so that we can put a better case together to try to track down the subject.
Jason, do you have a different perspective on that?
Sure. One thing I wanted to share is, how we found out about our data breach, and it's pretty interesting. There's two main ways, as I understand, companies find out about card data breaches, and one is they find out that their name is being used on the dark web. Their sellers are proclaiming that these cards are from so-and-so, and that's one way, and that's probably with the larger national retailers. In our case, and in many other cases, what happens is that a common point of purchase is identified, and what that is that as card brands are investigating their cards that they know have been breached and have been stolen, they're looking back at the records and they're looking back at the legitimate transactions that occurred before the data breach occurred, and they're identifying common points of purchase, a common retailer, restaurant that appears on all of those cards. So in our case, we were contacted by one of our card brands, and the contact was to say, you have 38 common points of purchase that we identified. And at that time, you know, it really wasn't a high alert situation. It could have been an employee using a scraper that was acquiring those 38 cards. But of course, it raised a very alarming red flag for us, and we pretty much escalated this to bring in a forensic investigator right away. And as the process unfolded, it unfolded very fast. We brought in a mainland attorney to assist us, an attorney that was very experienced in these data breach situations. She's been, at that time, had been busy for close to 5 years without ever, you know, advertising her services. It was just word of mouth. And as she took us through the process, we did not get to the issue of contacting law enforcement because it just wasn't on our radar. And it was just a brief conversation that she told us, well, just to let you know, I contacted the Secret Service that, as I understand, has dual jurisdiction and card breaches with the FBI. And that was my first understanding that, oh, well, yeah, I guess you should be contacting law enforcement. I later met Will, and we had a further discussion about that. So from a business perspective, one of the issues that arises is that you're focused on figuring out what occurred in your system and how to shut down the malware and how to secure your system. And I think from a legal perspective, the issue becomes is if we bring in law enforcement, will they want us to keep our system open so that they can gather evidence against the criminal? And that is the conflicting perspective and viewpoint. I think I would like to turn it back to Will because I think he has a further perspective about that issue.
Yeah, and that's very true, and it's something that does happen. Our priority, our focus is different than the business. Our priority as law enforcement is to collect evidence. So if a crime occurs, we are working towards attribution, trying to find who did it. In order to do that, we have to collect evidence. Now, a business, you as a business, your job is to go up and running as quick as possible. That's kind of counter of collecting evidence because when you're doing that, there goes the evidence. So I will say that the FBI of 5 to 10 years ago is quite a bit different than the FBI of today. The FBI 5 to 10 years ago, we would shut down your company. And it could be days upon weeks before we would collect the evidence that we needed, sometimes taking your servers, your computers, and things like that. Gone are those days. Now we have, FBI Honolulu, we have a team of CART. It's the Computer Analysis Response Team. We go on site and we image, it's an image forensic process, image on site, collect the data that we can get, and usually, unless you have terabytes upon terabytes of information, if you are, please talk to me. I'm interested in what kind of data you're holding. Then it's going to take less than a day, usually a couple hours. And our point, again, in and out as quick as possible. Collect that evidence, and then it's keys are back into you. You can start doing into the recovery mode. In that process, if we're lucky enough to help with attribution, maybe it's just we know the MO, we can say, hey, you might want to look here, here, and here, because we've collected that evidence and we can look. But the FBI of 10 years ago is different than today, so please give us a call if that is an opportunity.
So a lot of the things that we've talked about are external hacks, but there's also internal issues. Some of the things that I was discussing earlier, the fraud that has impacted me, came from either people I knew or people that were already working in the business. So I guess my question is, what internal controls can you put in place that aren't incredibly expensive that a small business can afford?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and take that for you. So that's why I'm here today, is to offer some insight. Wearing two hats, one as an internal person, the CFO of an brewing company, as well as being an outside CPA. You know, especially in Maui, Hawaii in general, it's an expensive place to do business, right? We all understand that. So it's easy to fall into a mentality of, I don't have the budget, I don't have the time. So if I were to emphasize one thing today, when you go home and you look at yourself in the mirror, you need to say, it is my kuleana to protect my business and my assets, because the buck stops with you. You might think you have somebody you trust. You might think that you have been able to outsource that, because a lot of people do not like accounting. That's why they hire bookkeepers primarily. But at the end of the day, nobody will protect your assets better than you will. So it is imperative that you know your numbers and you know what's going on within your company. So I want to emphasize that, because it really is your responsibility. And unfortunately, and I can't help but chuckle when people say, I didn't realize that person was a con man or a con woman. They didn't look like a con man. It's like, what are you thinking a con man looks like? They know you, they're your friends, they're your family, or they're very good in salesmanship. Their entire position is to extract funds from you. So if somebody is overly nice and overly agreeable, red flag. So basic things, okay, one of the most significant and easiest things that you can do that is free are logins. You might say, Russell, I'm a sole proprietor, I don't need a login. Well, here's the scenario. You're running late, inter-island flight, but you still have to have your Starbucks. You stop at the Starbucks on the way to the airplane, you leave your laptop there, somebody sees it, you walks off, they pick it up, you don't have it password protected, they immediately search on your computer, your laptop, passwords. Why? Because you need a password for everything, and it's different metrics, and you can't remember it, and you're not using a password software management, and you have it's for this bank account at this institution, and they just immediately sent that file to themselves via email. They now have all your information, and this has happened on several occasions. One little login, and it just protected all of your information, or at least allowed you time to figure out what to do. But generally speaking, in the accounting world, bank reconciliations are key, and some of the easiest things you can do as an owner, review every single canceled check that goes through your company. Review the direct debits on your bank account. This is something that, depending on the size of your company, it's 10 minutes to an hour a month that you're going to do, but that is going to be a high-level, immediate method of detecting fraud. Why? If you look in a QuickBooks, I'm going to assume most people use QuickBooks, the vendor might be Home Depot, but the check is actually written out to the employee. That's pretty arrogant. That's very obvious, but it might be a company that they set up, a shell company or a cousin's company. And so having mismatch on vendors, if you're unaware of the vendor is, then inquire. Ask until you obtain the information that you need. Going back to logins for QuickBooks is incredibly critical if you have employees in QuickBooks. Why? A lot of people do not realize that QuickBooks has an audit trail feature. You can go to reports, accountants and taxes, and audit trail. And what that audit trail does is it notifies any changes that occur within an account. So if you go pull your bank account and you're seeing a lot of changes within checks or deposits, that should be a red flag unless somebody was just literally making that many errors. So logins basically give you an audit trail as to who authorized a change. More in depth, how do people extract funds from the company? If you have somebody who has access or authority to a credit card, they need to have expense accounts. The expense account is there to give a level of accountability, but you have to have the receipt for the expense account. Meals is a common one abused by sales, right? Oh, I took this guy out, sure. Swiped it in his $100 meal at Mama's Fish House. Okay, well, there should be a notation. What client was that for? What was the goal of that sales call? So you can always follow up with the client. Hey, I heard you met with so-and-so. How did that sales call go? There's methods, there's protocols. It's even just to give a facade of accountability that will help a ton. Walmart, why do they have greeters at the front? Because they figured out that the theft prevention just by having somebody standing at the front was well in excess of the cost of that position. So that's another key one. Just review in general the vendors, on that credit card, but also review the source document. Here's an example. You have 15 to 20 people on health insurance. It is not hard for that person of authority to slide one or two people on that HMSA account. So what you're doing is you're going into QuickBooks, okay, that looks reasonable. Well, if you're not going back to the source document and reviewing who the actual employees are, you're going to miss it. A great one is Miko. Okay, your utility bills are $3-4 grand a month. Somebody can easily slide in a personal invoice, and what they'll do is they'll cut one check to cover 2 invoices. But if you're only looking at QuickBooks and not tracing it back to the source document, you're never going to think about it. And because their bill in relation to the normal bill is so small, it's just going to look normal. It's going to go through, look like it's completely appropriate. Another one is cell phones. It's very easy. If you have 10 people on a cell phone bill to add 1 or 2 more people, and these things can easily add up to about $1,000 a month for one employee. And for that one employee, 12 grand a year can be quite substantial. And that's why when you hear about these frauds and people are saying, how could it go on forever? Well, it was little slivers on various accounts that made it hard to detect. And once they are discovered, you expand your scope and you can see how deep it goes. And then all the historical data is there. All the proof has actually been sitting there, but there's lack of oversight. Even just general oversight, to go into it, spot check things, make sure that things, are really looking appropriate. Something that I'll kind of work towards finishing with this, something as a business owner you need to do if you're ever going to leverage and if you're really going to be successful is know your numbers inside and out. That is part of your job too, is how was the profitability? Where were the expenses that month? And one easy way to just gauge performance and metrics is this month compared to prior month. So just do a dollar amount comparison, do that for your P&L, do that for your balance sheet. Make sure that the balance sheet accounts look appropriate. If you have a negative where there should be a positive, that's the situation. Look into it, inquire, just ask, find out the answer, and make sure you know what's going on. The other one is percentage of expenses to your income. So if electric's normally 10% and the next month it's 25%, why? Was there justification for that? Little steps like this will flush out a lot of low-level frauds and quite easily. So something that I was going to recommend, though, because it's hard to find a really solid article because everybody's business is different, so internal controls for different businesses will vary. But an article I Googled, it's just 41 types of fraud and how to detect and prevent them. It's a good high-level overview. So what I will finish with real quick, the 2 frauds that are perpetrated are, number 1, by employees, and usually it's actually time theft. On social media, on the phone, doing something that they're not paid for. That's really your number 1 fraud, and it's costing everybody money in this room if you have an employee. I can tell you right that even us. Nobody can get around that, but trying to have a healthy balance, a nice, pleasant workplace without micromanaging, there's a balance, but that is one of the number 1 frauds. Number 2 is vendor fraud. If you become a larger organization, you might have ordered product A of quality, high quality. They sent product B that is a replica, but of lower quality. The other one is just not paying attention. I ordered safety glasses on Amazon, and it was for a box of 12 safety glasses. They sent me 1 pair. So I opened it. Fortunately, I knew it. I actually compared the bill of lading. I knew it because I ordered it, checked it, and I immediately reached out to Amazon. I was like, by the way, it says 1 box of 12. And after some back and forth, they're like, yeah, we sent you 1 box. So I was like, 1 box of 12. I didn't pay 12 times the amount of the cost of 1, and they finally agreed and sent it. So it could be errors, but quite frequently, if you buy something in bulk, okay, I bought 2,000 units of this, they sent 1,900. It's things of that nature. So if you're going to look into areas, of course, it's in-house and the employee, next is vendor.
So both internally and externally, what are some of the signs that you've been compromised?
Employee quit and is MIA. It's whenever there's a large egregious fraud, somebody just did not show up. And that's usually an indication that they started losing comfort with what they were doing, and then they were going to be caught. So if one day you have the rock star employee and it's higher level employee and they just stop showing up and stop calling, that's one indication that something is wrong.
But what about from external sources?
Yeah, one of those might be us. You wouldn't know until we notify you, which is unfortunate, which means it's probably going on for months, weeks, definitely weeks, probably months. And through a different investigation, we've come out that your company, your IP address has come up in the investigation, and we do a victim notification.
I like this question. If you have clicked on something and you say, oops, I probably shouldn't have done that, what's the next step? Call the FBI?
That's a good question. Let's do a little bit of due diligence. As much as I would love to field every single complaint, I do have limited resources. So what did you click? You will probably potentially start noticing something within the near future, and not crazy overt unless it's ransomware. If you have ransomware, you will know you have ransomware. But behind the scenes, some login activity and things like that. The fact is that I can't open up an investigation with you just being compromised. Something has to be stolen, which is unfortunate. And that's not mine, that's actually federal statute. I want to blame the attorneys on that. As much as I would love to investigate everything, there's resources that the attorneys say. So there has to be some kind of loss.
So, Jason, it looks like this one's directed at you. What remedial steps have you taken to instill a culture of fraud prevention into your business?
Yeah, very good question. I think the main thing was educating ourselves and our employees about what to look for in the phishing emails, but what to do, if you believe that you clicked on a fraudulent link. And so we encourage our employees to let our IT department know as soon as possible. Even if it's a small suspicion, we don't mind doing the investigation. And we've spent a lot of time on education. We invested in a program that requires all of our desktop users to take essentially what is about a 40-minute tutorial along with quizzes, and unless they pass, they have to redo the questionnaire. And we're going to be doing this every 6 months, for forever in my estimation, and understanding that, I think the techniques will evolve, and so will, the education that's involved. We're also actually doing social engineering attacks ourselves on our employees. And
I failed one of those once.
Yeah, and
I had to go to training.
Yep. And that's exactly what we do. We identify those that fell for the social engineering, and we take them through an educational process. So really the front line is your employees, even yourself, and making sure that you understand as best as possible what is going on externally, and making sure you're doing everything you can to avoid and mitigate the exposure.
So then, how do you set the tone when you hire a new employee that to instill this culture?
So when we're hiring higher level employees, naturally you want to have a welcoming environment, especially, state of Aloha and Ohana. And you really don't want to come off as micromanager, as accusational. So, and y'all are welcome to blame me today. I give you my permission to use my name. But even we have compilation, it's like, oh, you know what? Just so you know, whenever we hire you on, we do have internal controls that have been recommended to us by our CPA firm. So one thing that we're going to do every month is we're going to sit down together and we're going to review these and cancel checks every month. We're going to go through unusual transactions that we don't recognize. And by the way, you're going to be required to take a vacation every year. And so these are recommendations from our CPA firm. They've said that this is what helps keep the financial foundation strong. And really, rather than you kind of projecting as, I don't trust you, or I'm not going to trust you, you're blaming it on somebody else as providing advice that is thorough. But one of the easiest things you can do, I don't want to recommend a particular cloud service, but as we move into a paperless world, have invoices where you can easily access them. Because if you go over, and I experienced it myself, when you go over and you take a manual invoice, somebody perks up, they're like, did I do something wrong? What are you looking at? So they kind of automatically take this defensive nature, but if all of your invoices are in a protected cloud environment where you easily at night, can go check on them real quick, go to your HMSA or your Kaiser folder, with 12 months of invoices, click on them, you can open them up quickly, you can review them. You're doing all of that in a discreet manner, but you are checking behind the scenes. So I think a lot of it is emphasizing that we're here to make a strong financial foundation. We do have checks and balances. We do have internal controls. We would love your recommendations on internal controls that we can improve so that we can ensure that fraud is detected, and it's detected early on.
I like this question, because I'm a big fan of an iPad, and a couple of years ago, I moved over from, I don't know why I did it, I went onto an Apple platform. So because I have an Apple iPhone, an Apple iPad, and an Apple computer, then I'm not vulnerable, right?
You pointing the Apple question to the FBI?
Yes.
Yeah, you're very vulnerable still. Not necessarily malware-wise, but because all those devices are linked, all I have to do is compromise your Apple ID, and now I have everything, which is just a password.
Gotcha. I hope that answered whoever's question that was out there. So attacks can be really devastating to a company, and there's a lot of work that goes on, but in a way, Jason, do you think you've emerged a lot stronger from this experience?
Yeah, definitely. Part of our business philosophy has always been that you learn more from failure than you do from your successes, and as much successes as we've had over our history, we have many examples of failures, and definitely in this case of failing to protect our card data, as it turned out, this has definitely emboldened us to do better. And so one recent example is that we did have a attempted attack just a few weeks ago. Very proud to say that our employees identified it, as a suspicious email, and it's a prime example, we feel, of the difference that has been made in our organization 18 months later, that we're much better ahead of where we were before this incident.
And something I want to emphasize too, to explain how easy it is. I'm almost an expert at catching phishing emails. And now we had one the other day. It was, if you know, Garrett Marrero is the owner, Garrett at MauiBrewingUSA.com. Garrett Marrero, the whole thing, signature was copied. He was out of town. Hey, as you know, I'm out of town. I need you to send this money. It was to a vendor, but it was wrong account information. And I knew the payment was not due, and I knew it did not exist. I had a similar situation where it went to my controller. The controller verbally told me about it, everything very similar. I was like, oh, that does exist. And she forwarded the email to me, but it was different about account information. I caught it because it didn't have Garrett's signature on it. And Garrett happened to be in the room next door, but I had already sent the email to the bank. Please wire these funds. Fortunately, because our funds will not wire until after 11 a.m., right after I looked at it, I immediately called the bank and said, stop, do not send that wire. And I said, by the way, why are you not calling me before every wire transfer that you utilize for our company? Because that needs to change this second. Because the next thing what's going to happen is they're going to clone my email or Garrett's email, because we're 2 or 3 people who have the authority to send it, because all of our communication with the bank is primarily through email. And so they easily could have cloned our emails and sent it to the bank, and we would not have caught it until it's too late. So even somebody like me who can identify them thoroughly, they're duplicating everything and have one little letter off to where if you're not paying attention, it can easily slide through. But now we do have some other protocols in place to help prevent it. But it's the phishing, you're getting them on your cell phone, aren't you? AT&T, telemarketer. The phishing is increasing drastically because it works.
I love this question. Is there any way to get my money back? And by the way, I was super impressed on one of Will's slides where I think you'd achieved 70-some.
75%.
That's amazing.
If certain criteria are met. Money back, yes, again, very, very quickly, within a day or two. If you notify your financial institution and law enforcement, we have a pretty high chance to get it back if it meets thresholds. I will tell you, just kind of a heads up, if it's $5,000 or something like that, the banks are usually not inclined to do a lot of effort, but if we're talking about large chunks of money, then they'll be a little bit more supportive. If it's past a week or two, sorry, that's a write-off probably.
Okay. I had a really good one. Oh, here you go. And this says for Will. And I'll expand on this. The question says, for Will, tips for securing cloud platforms like MS Office 365. What about doing business in the cloud? Is there an inherent danger in that?
The cloud's one of those that it's been around for a little while, but it hasn't had successful compromises per se. However, how you log into or utilize the cloud, that mechanism is still vulnerable. So the cloud in of itself seems to be pretty solid, but still accessing the cloud and all the things like that, the infrastructure supporting or going to the cloud is vulnerable. So if that's your weakness, which it is, the cloud is going to be compromised.
So again, the cloud is all password based. And so one of the questions that came through was, tell us more about some software that helps manage passwords. Some good ones, some bad ones. Do you use them? Do you guys use them?
Yeah, I can't say names, unfortunately, but
Right.
do you guys?
Oh,
Well, if somebody finds out the password to the password management.
well, that's
So even though it can be encrypted, what I do is I'm a little more old school because it works better for me. I have an Excel file that is encrypted, and I keep it there, and it's an encrypted folder. It's not that somebody could actually get to it, but I think that it's deep enough that it's going to be quite challenging. And the reason I started using a software management system, it's like, well, when there's this update on this browser, it kicked me out and it stopped working. I was spending more time trying to get back into the software system to get it all to work or to get the browser updated to where it would be efficient, and I just got frustrated with it, and I kept my manual list for me personally. It's maybe not the best thing to do, but I have encrypted it within another folder that isn't encrypted, and then I only pull it up when I need it.
And there are, whether it's software, website-based, or even thumb drive-based password managers, just do your research into them, and for Pete's sake, make sure that the password that you use into that manager is very, very sophisticated. It's funny, we've kind of progressed back into, I do know several colleagues that actually have their passwords now written down because anything digital is potentially compromised. However, I work in a SCIF, which is a secure, compartmented room within the FBI building. I'm not too worried about somebody reading anything off of my desk, but your businesses, you're not safe to do that.
And we only have another minute or two left here, so let's go down the panel just one time. And what's your overall takeaway from this discussion? If you could sum it up in a sentence or two, what would it be?
I mean, I think it goes back to personal accountability. You know, if you want to prevent fraud, if you want to be on top of it, make sure you're involved in your business. And for some people, that's really not what, especially when it comes to numbers. But unfortunately, numbers is everything in the business. And really to look yourself in the mirror and say, hey, this is my responsibility. Make sure if you are hiring things out, I'm a CFO, right? So I would be the one who would take the money in the organization because I'm the only non-owner who has that authorization. I fully welcome Garrett and Melanie to ultimately keep tabs on me and to monitor me. Actually, after Kihana, I sent them all my passwords and said, don't forget, here's the combo to the safe. The petty cash is reconciled to the penny anytime you want to look at it. That is your right. Not only is it your right, it's your obligation to yourself to do it. So make sure that you fulfill your obligation to yourself by recognizing that nobody will protect your assets better than you do.
Mine would be paranoia. So paranoia is defined as, they actually aren't out to get you, but you're just paranoid that they are. They are out to get you. So you're not being paranoid, you're being diligent. It's more of just an awareness. Please be diligent in reviewing all the emails that you're getting, your clicks, the invoices that you're paying or receiving. Just have that second guessing nature. It's unfortunate. If it's inconvenient, then that means it's probably a security protocol that you should implement. And of course, if and when something does happen, I don't ever want you to have a relationship with me. That's kind of a weird stance with law enforcement. But please don't feel free or don't hesitate to reach out to law enforcement if something does happen.
For myself, I've become a firm believer in information sharing. I wish I was in the audience 2 years ago hearing our experiences, and I think that could have made a big difference. And so one of the organizations we joined shortly after our data breach incident is Cyber Hawaii. Will's a member. It's a membership. It's of law enforcement, the military, our major companies that from Hawaii Telecom to Hawaii Electric, and the point of it is that there's threats that are occurring all the time, and if we in Hawaii can share what's going on with each other, we're better apt to be able to mitigate the cyber criminal activity that's going on. So that's what I would say.
My takeaway on this is that these three guys took time out of their busy day. I mean, Jason flew from Honolulu. It's not like they don't have anything to do, and yet they're here sharing their information with you, and I just want to tell you how much I appreciate it, and I hope that if we could just prevent one fraud, then it was all worth it, right? So let's put your hands together. Thank you very much.